My name's Gareth Ledsham, and I am the partner responsible for equality, diversity and inclusion at Russell-Cooke, and I'd like to formally welcome you to this, our first aspiring BAME lawyers event. I'm not going to say very much. I'm going to let our panel do most of the talking. And just to say that this is an event that originally we had planned to run in March of this year. And owing to the COVID-19 pandemic, we were shut out of our venue, quite frankly, so we had to postpone. But we do hope to run a similar event in due course. However, given recent events over recent months, we thought that it's just a really important time to push ahead with this agenda and to be making our profession as open as possible to all people, whatever their background. And so we thought the time was right to have a Zoom event like everybody else is doing, and to enable our panel, who were very keen to speak to you in March and are very keen to speak to you now, to share their experiences with you. So I'm not going to say very much. I'm going to pass over to Kizzy, who's going to chair our panel for today, and she will introduce our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good afternoon for everyone for coming here today. We do appreciate it. As Gareth said, I am here to chair today's session. We're going to talk about some of the issues many of us have probably faced or continue to face in entering the legal profession, or in fact progressing within the profession. And we have got an esteemed panel, and I do mean it. These guys are, the cream of the crop, and they're going to share some of their own personal experiences, and perhaps I'll share a little bit of mine too, so that can allow you to start and continue your own conversations about racial diversity in your firms and your organisations. Talking about diversity, racial diversity in law firms, and it's been something that's really popular at the moment, it's very timely, but are we now starting to see real change, or are we seeing lip service being paid to the idea of true racial diversity, or if you will, tokenism? I'll ask the questions generally. Is there a difference between the approaches used by larger, the more elite commercial firms, or compare that to the way in which smaller niche city practices are addressing diversity? A couple of stats for you just to put things into context. 21% of our solicitors in the UK are from BAME backgrounds. Now, I'll come back to the definition of BAME because I know it can be slightly sensitive. But for the purposes of defining Black, Asian, and those from other minority ethnic backgrounds, in large firms, meaning 50 partners or more, they seem to have the lowest proportion of BAME partners, 8%. And according to the SRA's 2019 diversity data collection, 3% of solicitors and 3% of partners working in law firms are Black. You go to some of the larger solicitor firms in the city, and there you've got 1% of solicitors and 1% of partners that are Black. And that's something that I understand and I recognise. I came from a large international firm that gave me great experiences and teachings, but unfortunately at the time I didn't see any partners or even senior members of staff that looked like me. And for me that was a problem. Dealing with BAME, we do also appreciate that all ethnic minorities are not equally disadvantaged, and that's, I don't want to belittle the bracket, but we know that within the Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, some are better off than others, and therefore the use of BAME has been said to fail to appreciate that hierarchy. It's not something we can go into lots of detail about today, but we do recognise it, and I think those of us on the call who have either come into issues surrounding our backgrounds, particularly within the Black community, the comparison between Black and African, the Asian community, and the comparison perhaps between Indian, Pakistani and Bangladeshi, and so on and so on. So that, again, is another issue that I'm sure many of you have had discussions about. So we're here to tease out some of those issues surrounding racial diversity in law firms, but more importantly, determine what we can learn from people's experiences, and also discuss ways that we can affect real change. Now, the first person I will introduce today is Paulette Mastin. hang on. There we are. Paulette Mastin is counsel at Linklaters and also chair of the Black Solicitors Network. I will let Paulette almost introduce herself, but one of the questions I'd like to ask Paulette as we start the conversation today is, what's been your biggest challenge in entering the profession, or in fact progressing through the legal profession?
The biggest challenge for me entering the profession actually happened around the time I was looking into applying for a training contract. Actually, to begin with, law wasn't my first career. I started out in the field of investment banking, working with the swaps and derivatives team of a foreign investment bank. And I thought financial markets was the life for me. Until I was asked to assist on a House of Lords case involving derivatives contracts that the bank had entered into with local authorities. I was really intrigued by the research around it and understanding how to apply the law to transactions and the implications when things go wrong. And I have to say, with that, I was hooked. It then became my dream and ambition to become a lawyer with a leading law firm. So I took the high-risk, high-stakes decision to quit my job without another job to go to, and to train to pursue a legal career. It wasn't plain sailing as I dreamed it would be. A year later, some way into my postgraduate law studies, the GDL or the equivalent at the time, an ex-work colleague, an established lawyer no less, had this to say to a mutual friend of mine about my lofty ambitions. He advised there were two reasons why I would not make it, or I would struggle to make the grade in a city law firm. Number one, she's female, and number two, she's black. I thought, well, that's a challenge. It's not like I knew a great deal about the sector or the profession. I just knew I wanted to practice law. I must say that I wasn't daunted by this bleak prospects. You see, I'm negatively motivated, and if I'm told I can't do something or it's beyond me, I actually strive to turn that narrative on its head. So that really motivated me to prove this person wrong. A further challenge, though, was the application process. At the time, the UK was coming out of a long recession, so economically things weren't great. But after numerous applications and interviews and a great deal of perseverance, I was offered and accepted a training contract with global law firm Linklaters, and I haven't looked back since. Well, the journey has not been without bumps in the road and further challenges. What I would say is that, you know, being the product of hardworking immigrant parents, I had a strong work ethic drummed into me from an early age. Head down, work hard, you'll get on. What I can say is that that is important, a strong work ethic, but it's not enough. It's critical to take responsibility for your own career development. And I've actually come to realise that progression is driven by several factors. Some individuals are fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. They've been prepared and highly favoured, and so they're promoted. And then there's the rest of us. The hard truth for me was the need to recognise and understand what it takes to drive your career forward. And I've learned that you need hard technical skills to land the job, but you need soft skills to progress your career. Yeah. Things like, you know, seeking out stretch assignments, client and business development, opportunities, seeking out opportunities for networking, raising your profile internally as well as externally. That is how you build career capital. So in a nutshell, those have been the challenges for me entering the profession and progressing through the profession, and how I've worked at sort of circumnavigating all of that.
It's really interesting that you talk about networking and the softer skills, because I suppose as you are, when you're younger, you're, as you say, you're told work hard and you'll be a success. And I think in this climate it isn't enough, with that and intersectionality and the fact that there's many of us on this panel that are black, female, may have a disability, silent or otherwise, and so on and so on. And the fact is that you can be discriminated against in some shape or form for a number of reasons. So I think some of us find it difficult for a number of reasons in a number of ways. And one of the ways may well be focusing on outside skills and building your outside network. So with that in mind, talk to us a little bit about BSN, Black Solicitors Network, and how that has fitted into your goal and perhaps the goal for others, helping other young black students and junior lawyers.
Yeah, so in terms of how I came to the role of chairing the Black Solicitors Network, fundamentally, I believe that having had an opportunity to join the legal profession and forge a career with a leading city firm, it's incumbent upon me to pay it forwards. And that means encouraging and providing support to aspiring and junior lawyers in achieving their career goals. And I dedicate a great deal of time in doing that, particularly for those from BAME background. So in terms of how that has played out, how it's manifested itself, in 2008, I led an initiative to create the city branch of the Black Solicitors Network. And this initiative was conceived in the midst of a challenging economic environment with widespread redundancies. And we were acutely aware of the challenges facing city lawyers at the time, in particular BME lawyers. So there was no question that a support network of this nature was needed. So BSN City Group's core mission is to focus on the needs of and issues affecting Black corporate and commercial lawyers practicing in and around the City of London and Canary Wharf. BSN City Group has grown quite significantly since its inception, from a group of contacts and colleagues of around 30 or so people to around 400. And that, has happened over time as city lawyers avail themselves of this much needed support network. I now, and have done for the past 3 years, chair the wider Black Solicitors Network. And that is a dynamic, award-winning, non-profit organisation of 25 years this year. It's our silver anniversary, with around 5,000 members. And actually, a little while ago, we had a look at our database to really understand the makeup of our constituency. And we uncovered that around 30% of our membership are graduates, or undergraduates rather, essentially students. So that's become a real focus for us. So generally, BSN is a primary voice of Black solicitors across England and Wales, and we're committed to achieving equality of access, retention, and progression of Black solicitors and those seeking to enter the profession. And one of the initiatives that BSN runs is our careers workshops, which we have been running for some 12 years or more now. And we run for our student members, where we partner with law firms and corporates to provide tailored advice on applying for training contracts and internships. And this initiative is expanding into just following just our sort of review of our membership makeup. And so that's expanding into our nationwide grassroots program for our students. And that's going to be offering career support through the university years. And it'll be a yearly program and not just a sort of one-off workshop for those who apply and are successful to be admitted to the program. And we're running that in partnership with universities. And we also partner with leading technology consulting firm Accenture to provide internship opportunities for a select number of BSN student members. I think we had 14, and actually they're on the internship programme now. And that's successful BSN student applicants to Accenture. So in addition to that initiative, one troubling observation that we've made over the years is that the attrition levels for Black lawyers, particularly in the step up from trainee to associate, and of course from associate to partner, is higher than for any other group. So there remains, as you've rightly pointed out, Kizzy, a significant underrepresentation of BME lawyers in the senior ranks. And so one of the meaningful ways in which BSN City has sought to tackle that issue is through our Creating Pathways for Mentoring and Sponsorship programme, which was founded in 2014. It's an annual programme and it provides mid-level BME city lawyers with access to insights and perspectives on professional development from outside of their organisation. And the way that it works is that successful applicants to the programme are paired with senior city lawyers, partners and senior in-house counsel and counsel at law firms as mentors who provide tailored mentoring and career coaching to their mentees. Last year we had 20 plus mentees on the programme, and this year we have a more focused cohort of 14. So through the Creating Pathways programme, we're really sort of contributing to the acceleration of positive change and the progression of BME lawyers across the city.
It's a fantastic programme. I'm taking part in it, so I've got a mentee of my own who's absolutely fantastic, and I must admit it's a nice way. We will come on to mentorship probably in our Q&A, but it's a very nice way of being able to engage with those in entry to the legal profession or dealing with some issues upon the early stages of their career, and they're learning sort of practical tips from those of us who have gone through it and are probably still going through it. So I think it's a valuable initiative. I could speak to you all day, Paulette. We've got others. I've got to remember I'm chairing and I'm not listening. I'm not sitting here just listening and taking notes. But if you want to find out more about BSN and some of the initiatives that they're doing and certainly assisting with recruitment and support and mentorship, go onto the website. There's lots of information on there. But thank you very much, Paulette. We will come back to you in Q&A. Okay, so moving on to someone who is in the earlier stages of their career and tackling things from another angle, their own initiatives themselves, but we'll move on to Isaac Eloy, who by day is a trainee at Frith LLP and is also a Black Solicitors Network Rising Star for co-founding the Black Men in Law network, which is a group who's responsible for pushing cultural change and also pushing the ideas around intersectionality and other diversity issues that are raised in law firms. So Isaac, I'll put the same initial question to you. What has been your biggest challenge upon entering the legal profession and how are you finding it?
For me, I've had quite a few. But in different ways. It started all the way back at secondary school. So I went to an all boys school, was born and raised in West Yorkshire. And I realized that we had very, I guess, targeted approaches is the only way I can think of describing it. We had a specific set of energy that was kind of reserved only for Black boys. And I remember that very, very distinctly, and it kind of continued all the way through school. I realized I often had to work harder than my peers in an academic context. And even when I did, I wasn't given the recognition for working hard. That kind of stuck with me. Like Paul, I kind of thrive out of negativity. So someone kind of says I can't do something, I work harder. But unfortunately, there's only so far you can do that without, if you're not kind of keeping it in check and you're not looking after yourself and making sure that you're not running yourself into the ground. And effectively, that's what happened to me in sixth form. So I was kind of working hard, and obviously A-levels are very difficult.
Yeah.
I got to the end of that period, and realized I was really tired, and I couldn't figure out why I was so mentally tired. I felt absolutely exhausted, went to university, and then realized that how hard I'd had to work was kind of, everyone obviously has to work hard academically to get to university, but in comparison to my white peers, they, you know, it wasn't like getting to university was a massive achievement for them, whereas for me and my family, in terms of the boys, I'm the first, on my mum's side specifically, which is the side that are in Bradford, and that I was raised around. I'm the first to go to university and finish. Yeah, the first to go to university and finish, and the first to do law as well in my whole family. So I was kind of, you know, doing a lot of novel things. So I have obviously a lot of support from my family, but, you know, especially getting into law, I think this is the thing that's quite tricky for so many people, especially Black students, is it really does show the differentiation between, you know, class and what jobs are accessible to certain people.
Yeah.
And I noticed that even further when I got to work. So I started at Freeths in August 2015 as a paralegal. I did that for 3 years, and then I started training in 2018, and I experienced various issues. So firms, I don't think are used, as we've heard from the stats, they're not used to working around Black people or understanding the specific struggles that Black people go through, especially Black students, and what motivates Black students to apply. So for me, I was the only Black man in the training program out of about 115 trainees, and that includes sort of the paralegal. So you're a paralegal for a few years, and then you become a formal trainee and officially start training. Now there's a couple others at the non-qualified level and 2 at the post-qualification level. But obviously that's out of around 950 odd staff across the whole wider firm network. You know, you're very much alone. So when I was planning things like LGBT History Month, it all went swell. And then when I did the same thing for Black History Month, it became quite tricky, and realizing that people are very uncomfortable, as we've seen obviously in the last few months. They're very uncomfortable having honest and frank discussions, especially when you're looking at how your identity is composed. And so I used the experiences that I had at university from an academic perspective, having done law and Spanish, and just highlighting how race is composed. People often look at race as sort of just simply talking about skin color, when it's much deeper than that. It's obviously we're referring to a wider framework, but identities are composed. Unfortunately, from a historical perspective, identities were composed. Sort of the further away from Blackness you were, the more of a human you are, the better kind of individual you are. And it's very difficult to understand that if you've never had to think about that before. Yeah. When I was at uni, and someone said in my final year, he said, "Oh, I've never ever had to think in my life about what it means to be a white man." And I said, "Oh, wow, really?" And he said, "Yeah, I never have." And I said, "It's really funny because as far as I can remember, I've never been anybody other than being a Black man. And I'm proud, obviously, to be a Black man. But that's always been in my mind since I was a child. You know, the very first memories I have are racialized and gendered interactions between me and other white students, Black girls and Black boys, Asian boys and Asian girls at school. It's always been racialized. Whereas for him, he's gone through his life just being he was just Matt. And that was what, you know, I was trying to get people to understand. And it was quite difficult, but people just wouldn't sort of understand that.
I suppose we get consumed by our own bubble, and we kind of think this is our experience, this is what we're dealing with. You talking now and focusing very much on your own experience as a Black man, is that what spurred you on to co-found Black Men in Law? Because you did want to see that there is a difference between the way in which perhaps Black men have experienced issues and Black women have experienced issues. Maybe tell us a little bit more about Black Men in Law.
Absolutely. So I started to realise that it was tricky to find Black men if I needed mentors, at least openly anyway. You know, you get onto LinkedIn and you've just finished uni and realise, you know, I can't find any really visible Black men. You know, the first people that I found were people like Segun Osuntukun at BCLP, David Ampao, DLA Piper, and of course Tunde Okewale, the barrister. But outside of that, I couldn't really see any of the other men. And then I realized other kind of junior black male lawyers who I was speaking to all had very similar experiences, and we were saying we go through certain things, and we obviously have these discussions, and so in some ways felt like there was no forum for us to ever have any of these discussions, and people couldn't understand sometimes what you may be going through. So my co-founder, John Oladeji, and we had a phone call. This was I think around Christmas 2017. Realized we were on very much the same page, and we thought, well, we might as well come together and just, have a little gathering of friends, basically. So we decided to kind of go ahead and do that, and didn't think it was going to be anything big. It was only meant to be like 20, 30 of us getting together. Kind of put it out on LinkedIn, and it went a bit crazy, really. We realized that there was a really big interest in us all coming together like this, and especially in having support from all the black partners, saying, you do need these spaces to shine a light on issues that we go through, because what we realized was firms were kind of putting all black students together, which in some ways you can understand a little when you're at university, but it doesn't work when you get to the world of work, because you've got very specific gendered and racialized experiences for both black men and black women that impact you in particular ways. And so we've been really fortunate to work with firms like White & Case. So they're one of the premier sponsors that we have in the network. And we had an event with them. It was one of the very first events that we had with them, where we were speaking about basically a pathway to partnership, because what I wanted was to help the guys understand, because this is the issue, I think, with attrition. It's obviously people not seeing themselves in the profession reflected at different levels of seniority, but also just not understanding what you have to do in order to, be made up to a partner, or, to take, so people don't understand what you've got to do. And I think that's a big part of the issue. If you don't have the knowledge to kind of do better, then you can't be better, really. Yeah. And so the head of the Africa practice, a British Ghanaian man, Josh Sial, was talking about his route to partnership, and I think he did that at around 6 years PQE. And so for the guys that, they're ecstatic to see that. They're absolutely ecstatic, and it was wonderful to kind of see the impact on them and the students as well, having all the students engage with the network, and then slowly but surely seeing firms kind of speaking to the black men that they employ, and really making inroads in making sure that people see the diversity at their firm, and recognizing that actually if we don't have any black men we can speak to internally, then we've obviously got a problem. And so it has kind of started to spark a bit of a conversation, which I'm quite thankful for, but obviously there's still quite a long way to go. And I think obviously the last 4, 5, 6 months have really shown that we've still got a very, very long way to go. And that we tackle these issues through nuance, and that's the big thing for us in the network, is the nuance. We're trying to fix systemic issues with broad brushstrokes, and not realizing that at one point you could have done that many centuries ago, but you can't do that now because we're kind of too far down the road. You need a nuanced approach to specific and nuanced problems.
I think you're right, and to be honest with you, networks like Black Men in Law, and there are a number of other very similar networks who are trying to deal with those very issues. That they're not. It's not a broad brush approach that's going to resolve the situation. Initiatives that are being born out of Black Solicitors Network, Black Men in Law, will start that conversation, will continue the conversation. Sessions like today, I hope, will continue the conversation. But you tapped into something that I think was quite important, certainly something I learned as I was coming through the legal profession, which was I didn't see anyone around me that looked like me. Therefore, how will I expect to aspire to partnership, and therefore those underneath me then aspire to partnership? I think some people will have to experience the hard truth that sometimes it's not possible to do that within the firm that perhaps you have stayed in and tried to progress up the ranks, because that can be quite difficult to do if the ideologies and the policies aren't changing. Therefore, you might have to move somewhere else, or you yourself may have to start an initiative that's going to address and talk about some of those issues. Thanks very much, Isaac. We'll come back hopefully to some of your stories a little later on. Moving on to someone who has been in practice but moved out of practice to something that is truly aspirational, and I am pleased, hopefully all being well, that I'll be around to see our first president from a Black, Asian or minority ethnic background in 2021. We have the honour of having Stephanie Boyce with us, who's currently Vice President of the Law Society, soon to be President. That's got a nice ring to it, President of the Law Society in 2021. Stephanie, I'm going to ask you initially the same question. What has been your biggest challenge entering the profession, leaving practice, and I suppose carving out a name for yourself, well-deserved name for yourself in the Law Society?
Thank you, Kizzy. If I may, I still remain currently the Deputy
What
Vice
July?
President.
I wasn't sure, because I thought it must be July. Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
Not yes. So if but not for the pandemic, I would currently be Vice President, and David Green would have been President. But because of the pandemic, we've been extended. The President, Simon Davis, David and myself have been extended by 3 months. So I remain the Deputy Vice President of the Law Society of England and Wales until October this year, fingers crossed. But absolutely, to put it into context, all being well, I will become the 177th president, the 6th female and the first Black, Asian, minority ethnic president of the Law Society of England and Wales in its almost 200-year history. Yeah. So if I may tell you a little bit about the Law Society before I go on to challenges and the role we play, and I appreciate that many of you may already know what we do, but of course we are the independent body that represents solicitors in England and Wales, and our purpose is to be the voice of solicitors, to drive excellence in the profession and safeguard the rule of law. And we do this by influencing for impact, by speaking out for justice and on legal issues, promoting the profession by publicising the value of solicitors to the public, and driving professional excellence by helping solicitors to develop their expertise and their businesses, whether they work in firms, in-house or for themselves. And this includes working to ensure that the best can join the profession, irrespective of their background, and supporting equality, diversity and inclusion in the solicitor profession. So for me, the challenge. So recently, the Bridge Group noted in their 2017 report, and notably in their most recent report on SQE, monitoring and maximising diversity, that there is no silver bullet to address diversity in the legal profession because it is constructed of a complex range of factors at every stage on the journey to the profession. That, you know, increasing diversity in the profession is dependent critically on the actions of employers and training providers. But for me, I would go back further on that journey, my journey to the profession, and go back to school. You know, as we seek to understand and address the various factors that contribute to the lack of diversity amongst the legal profession. And for me, it was, and we've touched on this slightly before, it was about knowing what informed action to take in order to plan my route into the profession. And so for me, had I been exposed to law in school, it would have had the powerful potential, and I'm a strong advocate of law being taught in schools and being added to the national curriculum. And I'm told that's almost impossible. But as my mother says, if you don't ask, you don't get. But for me, teaching law in schools has the powerful potential to get minds focused, and that from an earlier age, potential candidates, including myself, would start to think about a legal career and what plan and actions must be in place to enable access to the profession. Because, you know, coming from a lower socio-economical background, I faced barriers and didn't have access to the networks from whence mentors, sponsors that we've spoken about, and from whence work experience is drawn from. But had I been exposed to law earlier on, and indeed, if our students are exposed to law earlier on, they start to take, as I say, informed action. As they progress through the education system, they start to build those networks, seek out those mentors, sponsors, connections, so that they achieve a clearer and coherent progression route at an earlier age, rather than later when perhaps options have become more limited. And so for me, that was my second year at university, and I came across an organisation called the Windsor Fellowship. Up until that point, I hadn't, I knew of lawyers on TV. I don't recall that I knew any personally, or any that I could, talk to or say, what do I do? But I came across the Windsor Fellowship, second year at university. But, by that point, it was like, oh my goodness, what do I do? And they were able to give me some insight into what I needed to do. But I realised I was slightly behind the curve. But I'm grateful for the opportunity. I was able to obtain work experience with through the Windsor Fellowship, with the then Lord Chancellor's Department. And worked under Jeff Hoon, as he was at the time, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary. But I had an exposure to different people, organisations that really drove that passion to become a lawyer. And I applied for law school. I didn't have a training contract, when I got to law school. I'm grateful for the assistance and the benefits that this country gave me in terms of, because my secondary schooling was done in America, but I came back here because I wanted to study in this jurisdiction, the jurisdiction of England and Wales. My American qualifications were not recognised, so I had to take some time out to get additional qualifications, so those qualifications would be recognised, that would enable me to access to higher education, as it was called then. That enabled me to go to university. And I started off part-time whilst working, then for British Rail, as it was then, and then decided, actually, I want to do this full-time. And so I remember when I packed up my car with all my worldly goods, went down to Mile End, and I remember the first night of being in this house, because I was too old to live on campus, but being in this house with two other students that I didn't know, being in Mile End, a million miles away from rural Buckinghamshire, just looking around crying. But I had a dream, I had a burning desire. And in fact, just telling my story now is making me slightly emotional, but a burning desire to fulfill my dreams. And as I say, I went to law school. I was able to get a grant from my local authority. I borrowed heavily from Barclays Bank as they provided a grant to go on to the legal practice course. And I remember someone saying when I came out of law school, somebody saying to me, my gosh, your debt is bigger than my mortgage. And I appreciate now that the debt is even greater. But, then, for somebody to say your debt is bigger than my mortgage was like, wow. But I went on to College of Law, Guildford, and I met some remarkable people who's left an indelible footprint in my life. And I remember coming home at Easter and my father saying to me, have you got a training contract? And I said, no. And he said, well, what have you been doing? So I explained to him, because, lots of people at Guildford, had training contracts. And I don't know if they do the same thing, where they post your, after an assessment, they post your grades and, everybody's there looking and, but I kept going. I didn't have that training contract. Went home at Easter. My father said to me, give me your paperwork, whatever it is, your CV, your paperwork, because my father worked at the local magistrates court at the time. And I was fortunate enough that, and I absolutely believe nothing comes to you before your time, that, as one door closes, it's because there's another one waiting to open further down the line. And a local firm, so less than 10 minutes walk from my home, my father, who talks to everyone, managed to hand out my paperwork, and I was called by a local firm to come in because the trainee had her husband had secured another job, which meant that they had to relocate. So there was this space there, and along came me. And spent time meeting the senior partner there, and we spoke about, because he also went to Guildford, and we spoke about, you know, all the different things there. And I was fortunate to get that training contract and complete my time and qualify later on, 2 years later on, in 2002.
I mean, what a story. I mean, and it's still going. It's still going. I mean, there's so many bits it'd be great to take from, and perhaps this will come out in the Q&A. But I think having gone through that experience and having gone through hurdles and you know, trying to achieve various things in your career, how do you feel that you'll be able to now inspire young lawyers of colour who actually want to get into the law, with or without all of its difficulties and foibles?
Well, you know, self-belief for me is key. You know, because, you know, one of the things I left out when I was talking about my journey is, you know, if I told you it took me 4 times to become Deputy Vice President, you know, would you believe me? But 4 attempts it took me to become Deputy Vice President. Such was the burning desire that I had to become Deputy Vice President. You know, so self-belief, resilience and determination. We spoke about determination. But for me, let not your setbacks be the end of your story, but an opportunity to try again. You know, Nelson Mandela took a long walk to freedom. 27 years he spent incarcerated. But he said he would come out and lead the nation. And indeed, he did. You know, and if he could persevere for 27 years, I could persevere for 4 attempts. So it's, you know, the world is filled with opportunities, an abundance of opportunities. And for me, it's, if I couldn't find that opportunity, I created it. So I wanted to become CEO, so I formed my own company, you know, and like I said, you know, it was a burning desire to be and to do. And that was my dream. I just had this dream and it kept me awake at night. And so to steal the words of Napoleon Hill, you know, kindle anew in your mind the fire of hope, faith, courage, and tolerance. And for me, as I say, I kept going. So the lessons wasn't in how many times did I get knocked back. It was in how did I get up. And we will face obstacles. Each and every one of us will face obstacles. But it's how we, and as I say, for me, I believe nothing comes before your time. But I never gave up. I never took no for an answer.
Point. That's the point. I think it's something definitely to take away, particularly for young students and junior lawyers who feel like it's difficult perhaps to get into the firm that they want to, or to get the work experience. I get a lot of letters from people who are seeking vacation placements who say, I didn't get through, or I didn't get the right feedback, or I felt like I wasn't the right fit. And what you say about failure, never look at it as failure. It's a lesson. It's a learning lesson that you use to do something else, or to change your approach, or there's always something to be learned, I think, from not making it the first time round and turning it into a positive. So thank you for that. Okay, lastly, but certainly not leastly, we're going to deal with some homegrown talent that we have at the moment at Russell-Cooke. And I want to speak to Rebecca Alanian and Shabnam Ali Khan. Shabnam is a senior associate with us at Russell-Cooke, and Rebecca is an associate with us. And I'd like them to perhaps talk to us a little bit about their own personal experiences in the law and some of their challenges that they have found, both in entering the profession, but also perhaps now that you're in a practice that I know very well and Gareth knows very well, how you're finding it, manoeuvring your way through the legal pitfalls and minefields. Let's start with Rebecca.
Hi everyone. So I think, like most people, I took the most indirect route into law, and I started off as a paralegal at a local law firm, chasing that elusive training contract. And when that didn't happen after 2 years, I decided to become a secretary for financial reasons, and also because I didn't know there were other routes into law. So with that in mind, I was getting experience working in different law firms, and about 5 years ago I was working at Russell-Cooke in the conveyancing department. and I saw there was an opening in a different department, and I went for it. I was proactive and I went for it, and I got the job. After many sleepless nights, I got the good news and I got the job, and I started off as a paralegal there. But I now knew that I could actually change. I could become a lawyer through different routes, so I decided to take the Silex route. And as of 9 months ago, I qualified through that route. I'm now a lawyer, and as of July 2020, I changed to a solicitor. So it has been a long, winding road, but I think being proactive and building up my network, certainly within the firm, has helped me get to where I am.
I think many of us have had one of those routes. I know lots of people who haven't necessarily followed the traditional trajectory through sort of particularly if you want to work in a city firm, starting as a trainee and going away up the ranks until you make it to the esteemed partnership forum. But it's nice to hear from others who have had a bit of a windy path, I think, as you put it. I had one of those as well. I didn't start off in a city firm, never really aspired to partnership, but here I am. And it's going from sort of doing legal aid criminal work, which I really loved, and then went through the process of prosecuting for a while, and then coming back to defence, and then wanting to work in the city. So I think there's a lot to be said for different routes through the law and how you've manoeuvred it, which is actually more common now than it was perhaps 5-10 years ago. Shabnam, what about you in terms of your route into the law? How have you found the journey?
Well, first of all, I want to say I think I'm suffering slightly from imposter syndrome following some amazing people on the panel today.
No, you're not.
So I'm learning a lot, so thank you, everyone. Just in terms of my route, yeah, it's a bit similar to Beck's. It wasn't the traditional route. So my journey started many years ago. I was about 15 when I decided I wanted to be a barrister. It was either a barrister or an actor. But being from an Asian family, it went down the barrister route. They didn't really encourage the arts, unfortunately. And I don't think that's changed an awful lot. But it was a big dream of mine. And I actually wrote a play when I was 15 with a friend of mine it was a game show. I wrote the whole thing, and it was called Guilty or Just Having a Bloody Good Time. And I was the barrister that presented it. I was all dramatic and advocacy and everything. So that was my dream. And I was still fairly positive, at that age, quite academic and studious and doing all sorts of extracurricular things. And when I went to university, that continued, and I was quite happy. I thought, yeah, this is going to be okay. I'm going to finish law, go to law school, and it's all going to fit really nicely. And this was about 20 years ago. And I think if I'd known then half of what I knew now, it would have stood me in much better stead. So if there'd been a lot more support out there in terms of diversity and inclusion, I think it's fantastic that we've got all these different networks. You've got Black Solicitors Network, you've got Asian Lawyers Network, you've got Pakistani lawyers, all sorts of things, much more awareness of gender and all those sorts of issues as well. I think if I'd had some of that, it would really have helped me. So I think now we're in a fantastic time, to be honest, and hopefully it's getting better. There's still a long way to go. But when I finished law school, I went straight to bar school to do my bar vocational course. And that is when it hit me that you are not the traditional version of what a barrister should look like. There were a few people from different backgrounds, of course. It wasn't just a sea of, white faces, to be honest. But it was a lot of me realising you're from an ordinary background, Shabnam. Your parents are immigrants. They haven't got a lot of money. You're lucky that you've had your fees paid. Obviously, that changed after a point. And you've had to work part-time to sort of help yourself. And I started working as a cleaner with my mum when I was 15. And it was one of the best experiences of my life because it taught me the value of hard work and not to just be chasing money, but actually sort of that work ethic, as Paulette touched on, and others have touched on as well. So I will never regret that. It taught me a great deal. But when I was at bar school, I did see a lot of people from middle, upper class backgrounds, a lot of Oxbridge people, and a lot of, people from the white group, for want of a better phrase. And that's when I started realizing it's not so straightforward. Getting pupillage, it's not going to be that easy. So again, it was that lack of guidance and potentially that lack of support, and maybe my own naivety, to be completely, open about it. And there were a lot of people at law school, at bar school, that already had pupilages because their dad was a judge, or they knew a QC in the family or something, and they had that. It was who you know, not what you knew, kind of approach. And I think that became more apparent. And when I left bar school, I kept applying for pupilages. And what I should have done, and this is something that Stephanie touched on as well, and Kizzy yourself as well, is I probably should have persevered. And that's a big tip that I would give to anyone today. Don't give up, 100% know your worth and be confident. Just because you don't look like the people in the top echelons of the law firms doesn't mean you're not capable of being up there. And I think that's something I really wish someone had sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, or taken me under their wing and actually given me that guidance to build my confidence. Because I applied for chambers, but I was just going through the motions. I was just applying. I wasn't really thinking, what else could I do to set myself apart? And there's more of that now. Join the networks, go to the events, put yourself out there. And echoing what everyone has said, be proactive. And also now, more than ever, use your diversity as an advantage, because it's
I was going to say exactly the same thing, because there seems to be a lot of talk about, it's quite hard for those who are in, a diversity bracket and we're different and that sort of thing. In one way, I'd say celebrate those differences. I think every one of us on this panel today have got things about us that make us unique and make us different, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. And I think particularly now and during this time, where there's a lot of talk about racial diversity, I think we should really push home how much our differences within race and ethnicity should be celebrated. And I always talk a lot about, I practice in health and safety litigation. There's not many of us, but if you don't remember my name, you'll certainly remember who I am, because I'm black, I'm female, and I've got locks, and there aren't many of us in health and safety who do that. Celebrate those differences, celebrate diversity, and I think
Absolutely.
That's what firms are now starting to do. On that point, lots of firms talk a lot about having BAME networks, and like I said, it's a bit of a sensitive subject. But what did particularly you, Rebecca and Shabs, think about the definition of BAME, and is it a case of lumping all diversities together, or are issues genuinely dealt with differently within the kind of Black, Asian, and other ethnic minority categories? And should it be dealt with differently?
I do think the BME framework, it certainly is a good framework to classify different ethnic minorities, but it doesn't identify the barriers, as Isaac was saying, for individual ethnic groups. And by grouping us together, you don't get the correct stats. You don't get you don't actually. I mean, you get a good idea of how many Asian females are in the profession, but you don't. But once it's all lumped together, you don't really see the bigger picture of how many, Chinese people are in the profession, how many Black people are in the profession. It's all lumped together, and that is a real cause for concern, because firms have used that framework to hide behind the true stats and where they are failing other groups, I think.
Agreed. Shabs?
Sorry. There you go. Sorry, just unmuting myself. But yeah, I agree with what Bex is saying. I think there's definitely we need to move away from what Isaac and everyone else was saying, Stephanie included, and yourself, Kizzy, about moving away from that broad brush approach. Because I can't really speak for what it's like to be a Black male trying to enter the legal profession, or a Black female trying to enter into the legal profession. So I think there needs to be that distinction. And just interestingly, Bex and I were talking about this earlier today. So I was a bit nervous. Bex was helping me, and Bex was even saying that there's issues that Black females will have that maybe an Asian female doesn't have. And Bex, you can chip in and point about hair, things like that. That's completely different to my understanding. Do you know what I mean?
There clearly is. I mean, there are differences within, and as I say, I appreciate the sensitivities around the use of the term, and trying to deal with diversity as a sort of global global issue, but clearly I think, having spoken to those of you on the panel today, there are different issues faced by different members of diversity groups. So I think we'll continue to talk about those issues. I want to now throw it open to attendees, and we've had a couple of questions in that I think I'll at least throw out to the whole panel, because I think you all might have something to say about it. One of the things that's been asked is, what can firms do from a practical perspective to enhance the experience of those from, and I'll use the term BAME for ease of reference, BAME lawyers, either at recruitment or progression stage? So what are some of the practical efforts that we think firms can and should be doing now? I mean, I'll talk about one of them. One of them is signing up to the kind of race fairness charter that I think a number of city firms have joined, and it's certainly proving to gain traction, and it's starting conversations around racial diversity, particularly in UK firms. But what else do we think firms should be doing from a practical perspective? I'll start with Paulette.
That's a very good question. So there are a number of issues, and I don't think there is a singular thing that law firms can do. There is rather a collection of things that law firms could do. But all of these, any of these initiatives, and this is just my own perspective, must, in my opinion, start with metrics. Because if you don't know what the landscape is from a diverse perspective within your organisation, how do you measure whether you are improving on things? So I think to begin with, it's around metrics. Really, I mean, Kizzy, you gave the figure earlier on, that lawyers make up around 3% of the profession, which some may say, actually it is the case, that is reflective of the workforce in England and Scotland and Wales, and that's great. But from a law firm's perspective, what is your demographic makeup when it comes to black lawyers? Understand what that is, and then of course, you know, implement systems and processes around measuring and monitoring racial diversity from recruitment through to retention and progression. And so, for example, when individuals leave, and of course people of colour tend to leave firms more so than those who are from non-BME backgrounds, conduct those exit interviews to really understand what the drivers are for such a dreadful attrition rate among our people. Remuneration and pay, you know, there should be a sort of level playing field around that. And committing to the race charter, that's great. The key question is, will any of those firms be publishing their data? And they're not obliged to.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily have an issue with reporting, because the numbers for black lawyers, black fee earners in firms is so small that there may be data privacy issues around disclosing what the numbers are and if the dial has shifted. So, oh gosh, yes, I saw that was Elizabeth James, yes, a black girl that I was at law school, where she was recruited, and so the numbers have shifted. So there are a number of sort of issues around that. So really understanding the metrics around recruitment, retention and progression. And then what happens to our people when they join firms? Do you care? Do leaders care? Do those who are managing talent care specifically about what happens with black talent or BME talent?
Yeah.
Why they leave? Okay. And, you know, people talk about anti-bias training. I think anti-racism training is a good thing. There are certain language behaviours that you use that may be actually unlawful. Do all of your staff know that? Is that properly implemented? Are you satisfied that all of those measures within the employment life cycle of an individual at your firm, from recruitment through to work allocation, through to pay, through to stretch opportunities, are all of those points in your life cycle tested to ensure that they are free of bias? If I'm appraising you, am I appraising you on a fair basis? Why am I setting a higher bar for you because you're different?
Yeah.
And it's policies, yes, but it's a mindset as well. And
I think
these
that's a good
I'm
point.
just touching on a few things.
No, but that's a good point. Even on your last point about how do we kind of look after our people as you go through your career, because you can get there and we'll get the stats and we'll make sure we've recruited well and we've done all of that. What do we do once they're in the system, once they're, you know, amongst, you know, their peers and their colleagues? How do we make sure that looking after them is continued?
Yeah.
That someone's asked a question, as I say, continue to send in your questions. Someone's asked a question about, you know, all of our careers and how do we find everyday working life? How do we deal with microaggressions and acts of overt and maybe covert racism as we go through our day-to-day lives? I mean, it's quite a difficult one to deal with in sort of 5 minutes, but do our own HR departments take microaggressions seriously, or is it dealt with in a sort of very softly kind of way? Maybe throw that to Isaac. You know, how have you experienced microaggressions, and if so, how have you dealt with them?
Plenty. I personally don't use that language anymore because they're all, you know, different forms of, I think the way we use a lot of the language to describe what happens to us, it kind of couches the feelings of people doing things to us.
Yeah.
So for example, if we compare it, and I just mean in a general sense, to the way we speak about race in the way that women quite rightfully speak about the way that men either behave towards them or approach them, the energy is completely different. So we're luckily, thankfully, in an age where women speak their minds now, whereas when we're talking about race or racial diversity, equality, racism itself, anti-blackness, the whole sector of all of these isms that we're going through, it's always very gentle. It's always very, you know, people are fragile and they don't know what they're doing and they're just unaware and they're quite afraid, and you know, maybe they don't know. And you know, if you speak, you know, and it's quite sad because when you realize that you go through that every single day of your life, you feel that when you're speaking about your own life experience, it's almost as if it's not real. You feel quite gaslit. So it's an example. If you speak to older Black people who migrated here in between 1940 and 1970, you ask them about their life experiences. What was life like when you came here? They'll make out everything was rosy. And then you're like, but you know, when you really delve past that first barrier, they were petrified for their lives. You know, my grandma said, you know, we had to run from the National Front all the time. I couldn't leave my house. So, but 5 minutes before, when I was talking to her, you know, she said, oh, everything was fine. It was just like being in the Caribbean. And I was like, really, Grandma? Really? And that's the thing, that a lot of people feel gaslit. So people feel really afraid to have those honest conversations. And I think when we get into the world of work, it's even worse because sometimes the people you may want to go to for help are aware of the problem and they actually protect the people doing wrong. And I think that's something that we've got to try and slowly weed out, that, you know, it's difficult because unfortunately, you know, HR should help you and protect you. But, you know, HR does work to help the firm. And that's the difficult balance you see. And I think what you often find is a lot of ethnic minorities are very acutely aware that people understand what's going on in the workplace, and you can speak about that. As soon as you open up your mouth to speak about the issue you're going through, you become the problem. I remember seeing a really interesting infographic. It was kind of framed around a woman of colour, and she was saying how this woman of colour experiences these issues at work. Then when she realises she's experienced these issues and raises her voice that these issues are happening to her and speaks to HR, she then becomes the problem. And then it kind of goes round in the sector, and eventually it culminates in that person leaving because the organisation effectively makes the victim of the situation the problem. And I think that's the big issue I think we've got in the sector, where now you're seeing a lot of, you know, firms asking their staff, what can we do? And quite rightfully, I think a lot of black lawyers are quite, they're sat there just thinking, really, you know, now you care about me. You know, we're looking at what's going on with like coronavirus, and people's family members are being disproportionately affected. Where, you know, I'm seeing people in my community at my age losing their parents in their early 20s. Their lives are, you know, changed forever. And then, you know, their workplaces are saying, oh, you know, what can we do to show that we care about you? You know, what can we do to help you? And it becomes it's too little too late.
It's too little too late, I was going to say. It's
the norm. Do you show ordinarily, you know, you say that you're wanting to, that you care and things like that, but we remember all of the times when, you know, you protected someone who was harming us, or people like us, or you didn't, you know, you kind of made out that something that was very obviously racist was just an accident, and someone didn't know what they were doing. They didn't try to dehumanize you on purpose. And that's the difficulty I think we're seeing right now at work.
It's such a difficult time, because I guess firms may say, we don't know, you know, we're damned if we do, damned if we don't. We're trying our best, and I'm speaking on behalf of someone who is a partner at a firm. We're trying our best to address some of those issues, to encourage discussion about it. We want to have initiatives. We want to make sure we're improving our diversity and inclusion stats, or even our approaches to diversity. I think one of the questions we've had in, which is probably quite pertinent, is that there are many firms who claim, particularly on their websites, that they're committed to improving diversity and inclusion. Some of that might be signing up to the Charter, some of that might well be, we've seen a number of open letters in light of the Black Lives Matter movement. Again, extremely commendable, and it's in its right place. I was at a firm that talks a lot about diversity and inclusion. At the time I was there, I didn't see enough action, but thank God that has moved. That's certainly moved on leaps and bounds since then. But the question is, what advice would you give to an aspiring solicitor at the start of researching firms to apply, to help in order to discern to what extent those claims that they are committed to improving diversity and inclusion are genuine, rather than empty promises to tick a box? I mean, I experienced a little bit of that, so I can maybe answer it to an extent. I remember going through the graduate recruitment process and interviewing a couple of young graduates for our vacation placement. And one of them had the balls to simply ask me, well, I see, because at that time I wasn't a partner, and they asked the question, I see that you're on the website and you're chairing one of the diversity groups and you're doing all this lovely stuff. Why are you not a partner? Because I don't see any sort of black female partners at this firm. And I didn't know what to say. And it's difficult when you're in a position where you're interviewing someone and you obviously want to show the firm in the best light, and they were a fantastic firm. Of course I want them to come and do a placement with us, but I couldn't answer that question without stumbling. And it made me think, either something has to change in this firm or I have to change. So I think students in particular are doing their homework on firms that simply say we're doing lots on diversity and inclusion and equality, but they want to know, what are you actually doing? And perhaps it's speaking, maybe going and speaking to people who work at those firms. Certainly have lots of networking programs where you can speak to practicing lawyers in the city firms that can tell you straight up what actually is going on within their firms, and how they're finding it themselves, as well as where they think the direction of diversity, equality and inclusion is going. So perhaps that is a way, I think, just simply talking to people who work at these firms and getting it firsthand from those that are there. Another question, and we can probably fit in at least one more question. Someone's asked, I'm a legal executive. Do you think it's in my best interest to cross-qualify and become a solicitor to increase my opportunities? I'm going to throw that open to those that took the unusual route. So Shabs and Rebecca, would you recommend someone cross-qualifying if they're a legal executive now? Will it increase their opportunities, particularly if they do have some diversity potential stumbling blocks?
I do know, I mean, being a lawyer, being a solicitor, there are some slight differences as to what and what you can't do. So whether or not it will increase their prospects, it's either, I don't think it's neither here nor there. I think what the issues around being a lawyer, being a solicitor, is whether or not it's the traditional being obviously okay, the solicitor route, being a solicitor, being a lawyer, it all embodies. It's about the oh god, I can't. Give me 1 second. So, being a lawyer, being a solicitor, it's all about respect and what you can earn, and the traditional makeup of a law environment. And as we know, there are so many issues about the traditional law set. We know it's mainly, white males. If you are a lawyer, if you are a legal executive, you are looked down upon. So those kind of things do come into play when you're thinking about transferring to becoming a solicitor. But I think in today's age, it doesn't matter at all. It's just about how you personally feel about it. And those rules about being a legal executive, being a paralegal, I think are definitely being broken down.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. It brings us, I suppose, to how firms look at qualifications, and do they distinguish between whether or not you've had a direct traditional route or not. Someone's asked a question. I'm trying to get as many questions as I possibly can because I'm conscious of time. Hopefully we will be finishing in the next couple of minutes. I'd like to throw something to Stephanie, and then finally actually to Gareth, because I think there's a couple of things that we might be able to talk about in terms of firms and what they're doing. But Stephanie, there's a question here around how do you feel firms should be measuring the effectiveness of their diversity, equality and inclusion programs? What do you think should be the benchmarks? How should they measure how well or not those initiatives are going?
Well, we know that data drives change. But we also know, and as Paulette mentioned earlier, we also know that firms, we're not measuring or monitoring what businesses are doing with that data. But to be clear, there's lots of initiatives going on out there in that space. And the Law Society is running a number of roundtables following the Black Lives Matter movement and the abhorrent events in the USA. We had a number of larger firms reach out to us to ask what more can be done, what should they be doing, and we ran a roundtable last night, and it's very clear that lots are being done, around contextualized recruitment, around trying to get people into the firms, down to their website, down to the language. But we're not seeing that convert into, visible outcomes. When it comes to access, retention and progression remains a real issue in the legal profession amongst our BAME colleagues. So what we're hoping to do, and we've got a number of BAME research roundtables as we undertake a survey to try and understand what the barriers are, and where businesses, firms are doing well, what they could be doing better, and how to create a more diverse, inclusive profession. So do look out for those roundtables. And as we continue to specifically have roundtables around the Black Lives Matter movement, I have been absolutely clear from the beginning that it is my intention to leave this profession more diverse and inclusive than the one I entered. There is work to be done to remove barriers, open doors, and challenge unacceptable behaviour. But this provides us, and somebody said earlier, this provides us with an absolute opportunity to be having these conversations and to actually, for the Law Society to be taking a lead role, because we know that change starts from the top. And so we're undertaking a longer term programme approach to diversity and inclusion that will span the presidency of David and myself, and beyond October 2022, because we're absolutely committed to driving change. I've been very clear, enough talking, it's time for action. And we are committed to working with firms and businesses and members to ensure that, that we leave this profession in better shape than we found it, and more diverse and inclusive.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Stephanie, I know that you've got to go, so you are excused if you've got to disappear. I think I'm just going to address one more issue and then we'll close for this evening. Thank you very much to all the attendees who have stuck with us and also who've sent in some fantastic questions. I think we're going to have to try and address these later for you. But I just want to close with one question that I think maybe Gareth can just sum up for us and incorporate into his summary. So the question's been asked, what conversations are being had at our level in our firm or in our firms to approach recruitment, retention and attrition of BAME lawyers going forward?
Thank you, Kizzy. I wasn't expecting a speaking part.
Well, I thought I'd give you one.
Thank you very much. Well, there are quite a few conversations going on at the moment. I have been in post as the EDI partner since, I think it's about February, March of this year. And so once sort of we got over the pandemic and I was working from home, I thought, okay, what is the position at the moment? And so at the moment, I am assessing where Russell-Cooke is in terms of diversity. I think that in some areas, for example, we do quite well in terms of the number of women we have, number of female partners. There are other areas where I think we could do better, and the number of BAME lawyers working for us could definitely be improved. We are having those conversations. One of the reasons I was so keen to have this event today is so as I could hear from people who have exemplary careers and to hear, and who are at the coalface of pushing these issues forward. I wanted to hear and learn from them about their experiences and about things that we as law firms can do to improve. I think very much that we welcome, as all law firms would say, applications from all sections of society, and I am looking at the moment about why is it that either we're not getting the applications, or the few applications we are getting, why are they not getting through? And I think there are conversations to be had about how wide we are casting our net in terms of our visibility to BAME potential applicants, and I think of that at the training contract level, but also at lawyers of all levels. I want people to know that we are a firm. We are actively looking to make sure that we've got a diverse workforce, because Russell-Cooke has a very wide client base. We act from corporates to charities and all sorts of things in between. We have a very diverse client base, and we need to be a firm that reflects the clients it serves. So we are looking at recruitment initiatives at the moment. We don't have clear sort of conclusions on that at the moment, but there are various initiatives that we're looking at, and I would say watch this space, and we'll see what we can do. But it is something we can do better, and I want to drive that forward.
As you say, I think we're here to engage in discussion. Some of the questions I think have certainly enlightened some of us as to what the ongoing issues are. And we'll continue to address them as a UK law firm that wants to do better and is seeking to do better. One thing I can say from my point of view is I joined the firm because I was encouraged by the amount of women that were on our board, and also we now have quite a few BAME partners, me being one of them. But I was encouraged that my diversities and all my intricacies were celebrated, as opposed to it being seen as something that they've got to address and get over. So firms are learning and they are listening, and hopefully this session will go some way towards continuing those discussions. But thank you so much for sticking with us and listening to our panel, all of whom have had some fantastic things to say. So I'd like to thank them for sitting with me and allowing me to ask you some pertinent questions, and I found it extremely enjoyable, even as a host, but more importantly as someone who's listening to all of your stories. So thank you so much.
And if I could just add to that, thanking our panel, especially those who've come from outside of Russell-Cooke to give up their time today. There is another question that I've been asked on the questions that we haven't had time to deal with, but I will actually respond to that question, which was addressed directly to me separately, because it was an interesting and important question. So yes, just to say thank you to our inspiring panel. It has been inspiring, it's just been brilliant to listen to all your stories and for you to share those with us. I also want to thank Russell-Cooke's marketing team, who have been working behind the scenes and making sure that we've had a relatively smooth run on Zoom this evening. Nobody dropped out. And most importantly, to thank all of you who came to listen to us. It's been a fantastic response. We've had some fantastic questions. And thank you very much. And I hope that I will get to see many of you in person when we're able to do this event in person in due course. So thank you very much and have a good evening.